Good afternoon and welcome to this presentation of Stop Announcements, Guideposts on the Path to a Successful Trip, a webinar being presented by Easter Seals Project Action. All participants will be in a listen-only mode. There will be an opportunity to ask questions during today's presentation. At that time, an operator will give instructions on how to ask your questions. If you should need assistance during the conference, please signal the operator by pressing star then 0 on your touch-tone phone. This conference is being recorded. I would now like to turn the conference over to Christian Borrego.
Thanks, Stephanie. Welcome, everybody. Easter Seals Project Action is very excited to present today's session. In this webinar, we're going to be going over a brief history of stop announcements and the ADA regulations that pertain to the stop announcements. We're also going to understand the important role they play in fixed route public transit. Today, you're going to be hearing from my colleague, Rick Opstalton, and myself, Christian Borrego. We are both training and technical assistance specialists with Easter Seals Project Action. Our presentation is structured to allow a good deal of time for questions at the end, so we look forward to a great discussion with you. I'd like to remind everyone that this session is being recorded and transcribed. It's going to be available in text, braille, and audio CD formats following the conference upon request. Please visit the Easter Seals Project Action website at www.projectaction.org to obtain a PDF or text format. You can also contact webinars at easterseals.com to request a braille or audio CD copy. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone that Easter Seals Project Action is a technical assistance center that strives to provide accurate information on the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act. What we provide is technical assistance and not legal advice. So in other words, it does not carry the force of the law. We aim to provide solutions using the ADA and occasionally other federal regulations as a baseline. With that, I will turn it over to Rick.
All right, thank you very much, Christian, and good afternoon or good morning, everybody, depending on where you are, and thanks very much for joining us for Stop Announcements, Guideposts on the Path to a Successful Trip. We think the title there is well chosen, as the availability of public transit to many people, the ability to transport yourself, to travel independently, is very highly dependent on knowing where you are. And so we're going to talk quite a bit today about the importance that having working and well-provided stop announcements serves in that goal. Christian did briefly introduce us, but I'll show you here our pictures. My name is Rick Opstalton, and you just heard moments ago from Christian Borrego, and it's our pleasure to talk to you. So in today's session, we will primarily be looking to cover 3 main points. The first is what are the regulations under the Americans with Disabilities Act as they pertain to stop announcements. We're going to talk a good deal, as I've said, about how stop announcements help the riding public, the role they play in providing for an independent, comfortable travel experience. And we'll discuss at some length best practices for the consistent and useful announcement of stops. Again, what are some of the key factors that can make a stop announcement program, and by extension the accessibility of your system overall, the best that it can possibly be. So given that, we'll begin by talking about the regulatory requirements. In this section, we will discuss those stops which are required by regulation to be announced, and we will provide a couple of hints and tips and ideas as to how one can maintain total compliance with ADA requirements. It is worth noting, as we discuss this section, that what we will talk about in the next couple of minutes are regulations that apply primarily to the provision of fixed route service. Regulations somewhat differ when you are considering demand response and other types of service. But given that background, we'll talk about then the reasons, the situations in which it is required per regulation to provide for stop announcements. The first of those 4 reasons is when you are traveling on a fixed route and you come across a transfer point. And what we're looking at here are transfer points between routes and between modes as well. So we're looking at a situation in which you might, for example, transfer from bus to another form of fixed route, for example, a ferry or a train or a light rail, what have you, subway. But situations where transfers between modes take place are required to be announced. It's also very important that if a route branches, that customers are able to know where they are along that route and are able to make the transition from one branch of service to another. And to demonstrate that point, we've included on this slide a map of the L line buses here in Washington, D.C. And you can see that there are several points at which the route diverges under the L1 or L2 service. So clearly it's important at each point where one would have to make a decision, do I go down this street or another, that you know where it is that you're traveling to be able to make that choice and make sure that you're continuing on the path that you intend to be following. The second required reason, essentially, why you would make stop announcements are at what are called major intersections and destination points. This is a point of some question. We occasionally get questions on here at Project Action, and the ADA does not specify in regulation what are those major points. This is then a point for local policy, essentially, to decide. And some agencies, for example, require the announcement of stops as they are listed in a time schedule. So each stop that is listed in the schedule, those are the minimum at which announcements are to be made. Other agencies, depending again on the number of stops and the nature of their own system, might require that each stop be announced. But it is important to consider what you and your community would find to be major intersections and major destination points. And this is something that we'll talk about how you would go about deciding, but suffice it to say that public involvement and an understanding of your community's riding habits are important in the determination of what are major destination points and intersections. The third requirement, as outlined in regulation, is that announcements are made at intervals along a route sufficient to permit individuals with visual disabilities to be oriented to their location. This is perhaps one of the most obvious uses and needs for the provision of stop announcements, so that someone who's not able to look out the window and understand where it is that they're traveling can keep themselves oriented, know where along their path they are at any particular time. This is especially important in a rural system or in a system in which there are fewer stops, because you will have, again, fewer opportunities based on the starting and stopping or movement of the bus in a regular fashion to know where it is that you are. So the announcement of stops, the announcements of location, really help to ensure that someone is able to follow along in their mind where they are in the course of their travel. These intervals that are announced, or the intervals at which announcements are made, forgive me, can be determined by time, or they can be determined by distance. But it is very helpful if points that are decided upon are perhaps known landmarks or areas of interest, perhaps turning onto different roads that are of import to your route, but announcing at those kinds of intervals that are sufficient so that someone can keep track of where they are on their route. And then the last point per regulatory requirement as to stop announcements is that they be given at the request of a person with a disability. And what that means in practice is essentially that they would be given at the request of anyone who should ask an operator to provide that. And so you'll have, of course, many a situation where someone is simply new to a route and asking, could you let me know when we get to such and such point that they're aware that they need to travel to, and they will ask for that accommodation, which would then be required to be provided. I would note when thinking about the possibility of someone asking for an announcement that that may come in different forms. That may come to you not from someone simply verbally saying, would you mind letting me know where we are, but someone with a hearing loss, for example, might provide a card, a piece of paper that says, could you let me know? And it's then important to remember and to ingrain this in training in some way, that the response, the call out, then again not happen in a strictly verbal way, but happen in a way that the person could understand, as they've obviously identified the need for that kind of accommodation in their communication method to the driver. Just to speak a little bit more about route identification, It's also required that a announcement be made if a route is is served by more than one route. So if you have a bus stop on which several routes stop, it's important that a bus as it approaches identify what route it's traveling on, so that someone who's waiting at the stop can know that they are about to board the bus that they intend to have. It's important then, of course, that operators know the other routes well enough to provide some level of travel instruction as they're coming into a stop. For example, if the driver of the number 80 bus is at a stop and they find the person standing there is waiting not for their bus but for a Route 16 bus, being able to identify to that person that indeed, yes, they are at the correct spot, but they're waiting for a different bus that comes, that they can do that and provide that level of sort of essential customer service. It's also important, obviously, that an announcement that is made be done loud enough so that someone who's standing on the curbside, standing at the bus stop, can hear the announcement, whether that is from an automated system or the voice of a person, just ensuring that that announcement is made in a clear enough voice and a loud enough voice that it can overcome whatever ambient noise exists and serves its purpose of identifying the bus to the waiting customer. So then to speak for a moment about waiting passengers, it's often a point of conflict in some systems when there are passengers waiting for a bus, but it's not certain whether they're reacting to a bus that's coming. You might be a bus operator and you drive down a street and you see that there's a stop ahead, but there's a person sitting there who doesn't seem to be very responsive to the approach of your bus. So the question then is, do you take the extra couple of minutes and stop and address this person, open the door and say, this is such and such bus, or do you, in the sake of timeliness, carry on? And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but suffice it to say that for some, it won't be obviously very easy to identify which bus is approaching. So considering how you might allow for that communication to take place, there might be some alternative means of signaling that some agencies have been able to provide for, but we will discuss those just a little bit more when we talk about best practice. One of the points of regulation that I wanted to raise is pertaining to the maintenance of equipment. I won't read you the legalese as posted here on the screen, but suffice it to say then that there are requirements that dictate that equipment that you have be maintained, features that are used for the accessibility of the vehicle, including signage and systems to communicate, to facilitate communications, as listed here under point A, are required to be maintained. And point B then essentially says if a accessibility feature, such as perhaps an automated announcement system, is not working, it is the requirement that an entity shall take reasonable steps to accommodate individuals with disabilities. So what this essentially means is that even if your agency has an automated stop announcing system, if that for whatever reason is not functioning when the route is being run, the accommodation per that section there would be simply for the operator to revert to a verbal announcement. And we'll talk about ways in which to ensure that those verbal announcements are done in a way sufficient to meet the regulatory requirements and provide good customer service. So with that, I'm going to ask Christian to tell us just a little bit more about the importance of stop announcements to the riding public.
All right. Well, thank you, Rick. And Rick's done a good job of kind of going over the basics of the regulation. And I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking to you to think a little bit more past beyond this just being a rule of something that needs to be done, and kind of thinking more in terms of how it's a good point of customer service. So thinking about some of the different individuals who might be impacted by not having a stop announced. We have here an example of someone who is blind or has low vision and who's riding on the bus, and the stops are not getting announced, or that individual has requested a stop to be announced and the operator did not comply. As you can probably imagine, if you don't have any kind of visual frame of reference for where you are, then you can quickly become lost in space. Anyone who's ridden the bus and not been able to see out the window because it's really crowded or something like that, and just doesn't know where they are, it's really easy to lose track of time, and it's difficult to gauge at what rate you're traveling, just because depending on how crowded it is, the bus might be making more frequent stops than normal, might be getting caught at more red lights. It's possible to judge where you are based on a few limited sensations, but without stop announcements, it becomes extremely difficult. That individual is also prone to becoming extremely distressed by the situation, which also makes it difficult to navigate the environment. And then, that person can risk becoming extremely lost. So, say for instance, they miss their stop and are just not accustomed to navigating back to where they're meant to get off, or are unfamiliar with the environment, or get off at a different stop by accident, thinking it might be theirs because they're just guessing. These are all circumstances under which that individual just could become very removed from their final destination, and that poses a major travel challenge to them. So that's a kind of primary example of when how a life without stop announcements would be extremely challenging. I'm thinking about someone who, say for instance, an older adult, an individual who maybe they just travel a route out of habit and have a very set pattern of where they go, and one day that they go to a new doctor's office or a different store, and that they're easily disoriented. They get on the bus and stop announcements aren't being made, then even if they can look out the window, that they might have a hard time reading the stop signs. They might be passing different landmarks that they just are unfamiliar with or can't recognize. They might be going through a section of town they don't know very well. And also, sometimes older adults are on transit because they have driven their whole lives, but are now having a hard time seeing at night, or having a tough time driving during certain times of the day. They've decided to give up the car keys and get on the bus. Not having stop announcements in that case, it's extremely challenging for that individual. They're going to have a hard time figuring out where they need to get off, where they might need to transfer, where their destination is. Not having stop announcements is something that's very impactful in a negative way to that individual's travel experience. And then there's just the general public benefit. I think we've all been in situations where we've been on a bus, we aren't really sure where we're going, and we're just new in town. I know I've been to a few different cities personally where I've gotten on the bus and announcements aren't being made regularly, and I consider myself a pretty competent traveler, but even I'll be very confused as to where I am, where I need to get off. If I'm looking to transfer, that's especially stressing if that stop's not getting announced, and that can lead to a lack of confidence and can also lead to someone choosing not to take transit anymore, which can be a problem for your ridership. There's also the distracted traveler. We've all I think interacted with those individuals. Someone who misses their stop, they're very distracted by their iPod or their smartphone, their iPad, what have you. They just get terribly lost, and if the stop announcement had been made, then that may have not been the case. So, kind of getting back to my initial point of thinking past just the regulations, thinking about the different individuals who ride your buses, and thinking about what kind of situations they might be put in, regardless of whether or not they have a disability or not, if stops are not getting announced. So going beyond ADA regulations, making stop announcements at regular intervals and upon request is just a good point of customer service. And Project Action always reminds people that while the ADA is a great baseline, going above and beyond is always very helpful to your ridership. That. I'd like Rick to review some best practices with you.
All right, thanks very much, Christian, for that. What I'll say before I begin in this section is that much of what I'm about to discuss as far as best practices comes from a publication that Project Action produced a few years ago about what we're talking about essentially is the provision of stop announcements, and is a very well-done report about what's been working in various transit agencies around the country. So we're going to provide that to everybody as a link in an email that will go to registered participants following today's presentation. But I think it's important when you consider how to instruct your agency, how to share the message of the importance of stop announcements as we're doing today, that your personnel, including your drivers, understand a few things. One, understand the importance of stop announcements to riders. In much the way that Christian was just discussing what it means for folks to lose track of where they are and how that can affect your riding experience and your confidence in yourself and your desire to ride again. It's also a very good idea to share personal stories in this kind of sharing experience, finding someone in the community who might serve as a good advocate, a good voice, for example, for the disability community, who can say, this is what it has meant to me, this is how I'm able to live independently, and just really bringing to the forefront the importance that something so basic as stop announcements. We know this is a very basic topic, but the reason we discuss it in this way, the reason we give as much emphasis as we do to this topic, is because it has a true personal impact on people's lives and independence. And to share that from a personal perspective with those whose job it is to ensure that the customer service experience is good, will have a strong effect. We've found that in many places that we've discussed these things with around the country. It's also, of course, important to emphasize the fact that failure to provide stop announcements constitutes essentially a civil rights violation. It is a discriminatory practice, in essence, that prevents someone with a disability from using the transportation system in the same way that someone without would do so. And so it's also important then to relate that to the requirements set forth by a transportation agency as they pertain to performance, and understanding, for example, why a disciplinary system might be set up that enforces the provision of stop announcements. Not because we're trying to be mean, vindictive, what have you, but because of our understanding of the personal impact and the serious nature of the civil rights and the way that stop announcements defends one's civil rights. So I mentioned a moment ago that you can find a great benefit from involving the public, from involving someone who rides the system, who uses the stop announcements in the way that we've discussed. Public involvement in a variety of ways is very important to a well-designed effort to ensure that stop announcements are done correctly. And this can happen in a couple of ways. I said a key part of the training effort. What I mean by that, of course, is, like I said, telling those personal stories, but also in serving as monitors. And the public, of course, are the ones who are out there most obviously able to tell you what's happening on the bus, what's working, what's not. So by simply allowing folks to report malfunctions. And we've also seen that in many places it's a very good idea to remind in some way the public that we ask for your input on this. We ask that you call us if you find that stop announcements are not being made. So perhaps including those kinds of public service announcements, reminders if you will, on the loop that might play through your automated PA system, what have you. It's also a very good practice that we found in many places to incorporate some sort of secret shopper effort, but essentially a monitoring effort of folks who are riding the system and able to report on how well drivers are doing in ensuring that the announcements are being made. The public can also be very helpful, of course, in understanding where you want to set your parameters of the system. For example, what are the key landmarks? What are the distances sufficient to provide for orientation to the system, and helping you to understand that. Expressing preferences also from the public about issues like the voice used in the announcements, if they are automated, the tone, the way essentially that they sound. What is the most easily understood, what gets the most attention, and can kind of overcome the din of other sounds that we all know on the voice, on the bus, excuse me, what volumes are the most preferable to the riding public. But seek out the public. Look to your advisory committees, for example, to help to influence how the system works best for the riding public. Another point of best practice that we speak to quite a lot is, of course, the maintenance of equipment. So assuming that you have automated equipment that provides for your stop announcements in the best case scenario, ensuring that that's functioning in a pre-departure check. If you don't, then whatever microphone system you might use through the bus, if your announcements are done by the voice of an operator, ensuring that those are working. Calibrating as needed. Really here the effort is to make sure that, again, if you have an automated system that's based on some sort of GPS signal, that your stops are being made at the point, your announcements are being made at the stops or at the points where you've designated, and are not because of some miscalibration happening too early, perhaps, or too late. And while we want things to operate in the most ideal way possible, understand also that we need backup plans. And I know that the majority of systems are moving toward an automated announcement setup, but understanding the importance of providing for a backup. So having an easily accessible list of required stops that is printed, that's at the easy hand of an operator so that they can fall back on that, and the training is sufficient to allow them to do that when things go wrong, which, as we all know, they invariably do. And Christian earlier was talking about the fact that we discussed the ADA, we discussed regulations as essentially a baseline, what must be done. We're going to talk for a moment about what really it means to go above and beyond requirements as far as stop announcements. It's helpful and creates a very informative, kind of welcoming environment to the riding public, also to identify points that are of interest. That might not be your major points, but might be points that you might want to just inform the public. We're now approaching such and such medical center, educational institutions, those places in your community like shopping centers or whatever other major traffic generators that you know of that are important for the riding public to know where they are. And again, this goes back to Christian's earlier point. This is helpful not only to those who might be riding and having disabilities, but for the general public as well to know, oh, I'm now approaching this particular tourist location or what have you. But again, as you look to kind of see what's most helpful, how can we go above and beyond in providing what really is a service to the public, consult the riders and see that you are responsive to what it is that they want to have in the system in this way. Earlier, I spoke about identifying waiting passengers. This is, again, a point very much of local policy. But as we discussed, a situation in which you're approaching a stop and there's someone standing there, but you're not terribly sure if they are looking for your bus, understanding what the policy of your agency is as it relates to that kind of situation. And in some places, a policy is essentially stop unless you're waved on. So unless the person in some noticeable, visible fashion says, oh, no, you can go on, I'm going for the next one, to stop and identify. Some jurisdictions, some agencies have provided signal cards or some sort of signaling mechanism. So you might even have a pole, some sort of device attached to a bus stop that has some sort of beacon to it. So you might have a button that you could press that would light or in some way create some sort of visual signal for the buses that are approaching, so that that person is able to get on the bus that they're looking for. But it would be just a matter of consultation with your riding public, with your advisors, to understand what are the needs that we have here, and how can we design a system that would be able to ensure that everybody can ride in the way they want to. And it's also important to understand that there are regulatory requirements that speak to training. So we hope that what we're providing here today can help you feel as if you're fulfilling those requirements. But it is a requirement per regulation that an entity that operates a fixed route or demand response system ensure that personnel are trained proficiently to operate the vehicles and operate the equipment and assist and treat individuals with disabilities who use the service in a respectful and courteous way. And so, again, just understanding the importance of training, of regular instruction for anyone who's involved in the system. So, how would you want to look at how you train for the provisional stop announcements? Well, as we said before, you want to make sure that people understand why it's important to provide stop announcements, why route identification announcements are made. And we find that it's most important if an agency, through its staff, not only just on the front line of those who are operating the buses, but also supervisors, understand the importance of stop announcements. For operators, understanding exactly how you do what you do, when and where, how you make the announcements, when you make them, and why it is you're doing that. But then it's also important to ensure that supervisors and those who are in charge of making sure the system is operating smoothly at a system level understand how best to monitor, to coach, to enforce the announcement requirements, but again also have that underpinning of understanding why it is that this is such an important requirement. We have also found in, for example, our document that I discussed earlier that we'll send to you, that team trainings, in which you have several drivers who are new to your system, are driving together, and one might be actually operating the vehicle, while another is identifying landmarks, and a third is providing the verbal stops, or some sort of team approach whereby you switch off those responsibilities, but everybody has had experience in a training setup with providing verbal stop announcements, so it becomes very, very normal. I would also say when you consider kind of an agency-wide or a system-wide understanding of training and its importance, that you look also to representatives of any unions that might represent your transportation professionals, your drivers. Because it's important that all who are involved in the disciplinary setup, in the monitoring of employee performance, are seen to be on the same page as to the importance of this particular point of service, so that you have just a clear understanding across the agency at all levels as to why we're doing what we're doing. And again, remember also that mechanics should have a clear understanding of how to maintain and repair whatever equipment it is that you use to provide stop announcements, again, automated or otherwise, to ensure that that's operating in the best way possible. So assuming that you've done your best in providing the training, you have done your best in maintaining equipment, and yet the unexpected happens. There are a few points that we think are very important here when trying to create redundancy in your system, essentially. For drivers, an understanding of how to provide some sort of guidance to customers who've gotten off track. So Christian spoke earlier about the importance of stop announcements to someone who's blind, visually impaired. And if someone has missed their stop and is now somewhere where they don't expect to be, again, as Christian said, it can be extremely disorienting. It might to some extent be less safe for the person to be now at a different place than they intended to be. They're not oriented to the surroundings there. So understanding a way in which drivers might help to say, if you take these number of steps in that direction, you'll find yourself back at a stop, but some level of training and familiarity with that kind of level of customer service to people with a variety of disabilities to understand how to respond in a reactive way to that situation arising. So that's just a level of customer service that we think is important as you consider that training. Again, we've talked at length about preparing to offer verbal announcements and understanding how to do that and having that system provided. For passengers, you're riding along and again, the unexpected is happening and the announcements are not being made in the way in which you expect. Well, a few things. One, we suggest here at Project Action that you obviously take a proactive approach and notify drivers of a malfunction. It's quite possible that in the act of driving and being concentrated on the road as they should be, the drivers simply lose their attentiveness to the fact that the automated announcements are not happening, or perhaps that they themselves are not providing those announcements. So simply notifying a driver of a malfunction. It's also a good idea for the riding public to serve that role, as we mentioned earlier, of being proactive monitors to the system and responding and calling into customer service when they're riding on a bus that it has some sort of malfunctioning system. Again, noting here the bus number and being that voice, also because even if you might inform a driver of some malfunction on the bus, you back them up. You take the responsibility a little bit off their shoulders to record every incident and know what's happening, but also to provide your system and its administrators with an understanding of the difficulty that you're encountering. So that then sort of covers what we had generally wanted to share in terms of the importance of stop announcements and why we're doing them and the regulations behind them. Christian had mentioned in his introductory remarks that we would like for this to be a pretty interactive session, and we'd like to have a good deal of time to answer questions from the field. So we have, thankfully, in our schedule a good deal of time now as our remarks close. So let me ask Stephanie if you could please let us know how to ask questions.
At this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Again, that is star, then the number 1 to ask a question. Your first question comes from the line of Ross in Florida.
Well, hi.
Hello. Quick question just to clarify. A bus transfer point, is that limited to an off-street bus transfer, or are there any limits on the safety of transferring from one bus to another when you have to, for example, cross a busy street?
When you say limits on the safety, can you explain a little bit what it is you mean?
Sure. Down here in Florida, we are not too proud of the fact that we're one of the most pedestrian dangerous places to live. So there are 8, 10-lane roads where one could have to cross, 2 8 to 10 lane roads in order to get to a different bus. We would prefer not to announce on one route that this is a transfer point for the other because of safety concerns.
So the question is, would that be considered per regulation to be a transfer point that one would have to announce?
Yes.
I'm going to turn to Ken Thompson, who's sitting here with us, and he seems butting at the...
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of think about that, because if it really is a hazard, I mean, is there accessible crosswalks across those multi-lane roads? I mean, is there infrastructure for safe crossing?
You ever played Frogger?
Yeah.
So if you have no disability, then you've got a shot at getting across safely if you're fast and can negotiate, cars turning on right without a signal in all 4 directions. If you have a disability, you're taking your life in your hands.
Mm-hmm. So, the question would be, you could announce it. Now, is there any other places where connections are made? Those would be the only places.
Yeah, the connections would be, I'd have to double check our system completely, but I'm thinking that all the connections can be made at a safer transfer point where it's announced that that's a safe transfer point.
Yeah, I mean,
I would err on the side of safety. I don't think that one would necessarily presume that that's a true transfer point. If you have an unsafe situation that exists that you'd have to negotiate in a Frogger-like fashion to make that transfer happen. So I think you would be in a pretty safe ground to say that that's in fact not a transfer point as your system would define it, and to not encourage by way of providing that stop announcement that people take that unsafe maneuver.
Great. Frogger rules. Thanks, guys.
Sure. Let me allow for the queue on the phone to build just a little bit more, and I'll turn to the chat box where we have a couple of questions I know that have come in. Let's see here. The first comes from Steve, and he asks, do you have any guidance for BRT announcements? Should they be more frequent than normal fixed route?
Yeah, my thought on that, BRT by its nature has fewer stops, and BRT typically, with the fewer stops, I mean, it's done different ways. I mean, I've seen BRT really, they concentrate their announcements just around where the stops are, but they also talk more about, on BRT with fewer stops, a lot of times there's more connection around those stops. And a lot of times BRT stops are spaced around major destinations or trip generators too. So it all really depends on how your system is structured, how your spacing is on your stop. It's probably not a real clear answer, but BRT would still be sort of run like a regular fixed route as far as your announcements, but it would be kind of a local decision on how is that information conveyed, depending on the structure of your system. Because some BRT systems run with widely spaced stops in some sections, but when they get into, say, a more densely populated area, then it kind of almost runs like a regular fixed route. So,
I would say err on the side of providing more information than less.
Absolutely.
That's a baseline statement I would make, because you want to make sure that people are able to know where they are. And if it comes to a question of this kind, speak again to your public. Get that input as to understanding how frequently it's needed for people to know where they are, to achieve that orientation goal that stop announcements have. So hopefully that's helpful for you, Steve. And I will now ask Stephanie, can we have another question from the phone, please?
Certainly. Your next question comes from Chris in Illinois.
Hello. Hello. I live in Peoria, Illinois, which is a pretty urbanized area. And I like to have stops called out, not only for blind and deaf people, but for people who cannot read. And the hardest part for choices is there are some routes that are so busy that I can't determine where the stop is. And so I end up asking the driver how much stopping distance they need, as well as telling my destination. But you know, that's where I see the challenge of being a driver and trying to provide verbal stops to be a real problem. And I end up saying, well, I'd rather have them drive safely, you know, because the traffic is so difficult. And so how do we help drivers and passengers in those kind of circumstances? Because we have a lot of area on one route that has no sidewalks, and it is crossing 4 lanes of traffic.
Well, okay, a few points of advice. I'll start here and I'll ask my colleagues to jump in if they have anything else they would like to add. But one, if you're concerned about a situation like that where the driver's attention is drawn in too many directions, if your system does not have an automated mechanism, I would encourage you to advocate for it. It's very beneficial in a lot of different ways, and something that drivers certainly would support, and is definitely the trend. So trying to help them in that way to say, you know, wouldn't it be great if you guys didn't have to worry about making those announcements verbally? What you had suggested, Chris, in terms of asking the driver to let you know how much time you need to stop, I think it's very helpful to have that kind of communication and say, you know, I need to get to such and such place. How do I get there? You know, where's the place I want to get off? How do I want to make that trip? Where do I want to make my transfer? And drivers who are well familiar with their system would be able to let you know, the best way to do it is to cross at this point, cross this street. As the previous questioner had said, they might know the difference between a less safe transfer point and one that is more safe, and are able to provide that to you. And so I would encourage that level of kind of familiarity by way of training and experience, to the extent that an agency can try to foster that, to please do so. Anything else from my colleagues here on the table?
Yeah, I think that's...
No?
Yeah.
All right. Let's then go to another question from our chat box. We have Michael, who has asked, we are a very rural system. We have stops that are sometimes 15 miles apart. Do you need to provide announcements between those stops? I would suggest that you would want to make announcements. People are going to forget. Let's just put it this way. People might well forget where they are, where they're traveling, and we get a little dozy on long trips. So providing announcements in a more frequent way in between those long stretches can provide for that requirement that people remain oriented as to where they are in space. So I would say we would definitely encourage it. Again, I'll ask any...
then this is Christian, and this is an above and beyond the regs kind of thing, but just a suggestion that if the stops are that infrequent, when you've made a stop and you're avoiding passengers, saying, oh, just to let you know the next stop is at that point in time, because sometimes individuals might not realize that there is not an intermediate stop, and they way overshoot their destination. That can be an issue. But again, in a rural system like that one, then it's possible also that your riders know exactly where they're going, know the system really well, since there are fewer stops, so it's easier to memorize the schedule there. But like Rick said, it's a good point of customer service just to perhaps make slightly more frequent announcements to make sure that no one misses their stop and has to come all the way back.
Kind of like just so you know, we're headed toward XYZ place, and we're getting closer.
And another place where you might want to use your customers as to what kind of information they want along that 15-mile stretch.
Yeah. Good. Then with that, I will ask for Stephanie. Can we have another question from the phone, please?
Your next question comes from Marge in Wyoming.
Hi. We're a really small, low-tech system. We've only got 7 fixed-route buses. Do not have automated stop announcements. And of course, we're challenged with having the drivers make them consistently too. But we struggle particularly with hearing that passengers that have a hearing loss or are deaf. How to address that to stop announcements, because if the drivers do them, they're not able to hear what they're telling them, and we get challenged with that, and we're wondering what suggestions you might have to overcome that.
Great, thanks for the question, Marge. I would say, if you think about a best case scenario, you have some sort of automated system that has also a visual cue, like a text screen, right? But could you create a card that the person, so a stack of cards that identifies each of the stops, and perhaps have some sort of mechanism that you can show those behind or above the driver in some way. I would encourage looking for some way to create a visual cue. I know that's a very basic idea that I just had, but the idea here really is to communicate in a way that
visual cue. Okay.
Yeah. Really, a set of big index cards. Could even be on a circular roll. And you flip over to the next one on the route, and that's perhaps mounted somewhere that people on the bus can see it. That would, I think, suffice in providing for that kind of accommodation to someone's inability to hear. So hopefully that's helpful, and let's move on to a question we had in the chat box from Stephanie, who says, essentially, how do you convey that stop announcements are not being done without creating animosity with drivers and with the transit agency? And I guess I would start off this question by saying what you really want to always try to create is a understanding that when people make a comment to a transit agency, to drivers, what they really are trying to do is improve the system overall and not being necessarily punitive. So conveying a message that starts with, I understand that this is a part of your job and that it's one that might be complicated for you because it's kind of an accessory responsibility beyond maneuvering the bus safely, but what can we do to make life easier for you, Mr. Driver, and for me, the riding passenger? And just trying to communicate the issue in that way, in a cooperative fashion. Hopefully that kind of gives some thought, but understanding that people really do, operators really do want to provide the best service they can for the most part, but are often hindered by the responsibilities of the work, and seeing what we can do together to do that. Let me see, is there another question on the telephone for us, Stephanie?
Your next question comes from Larry in Massachusetts.
Hello. In your presentation, you stated that if there are issues regarding the the automated equipment or equipment that's used to make stop announcements, to contact customer service and make sure that you have something like the coach number or something like that. The challenge would be with some people with visual impairments really seeing the coach number, which for big systems such as in Boston, Chicago, and New York, it could be a bit of a problem when you have more than one bus kind of serving a given stop at a certain time. Are there any best practices in terms of trying to make information such as coach numbers, train numbers, and things like that accessible for so that people with visual impairments can access that information and be a part of really kind of that process that helps to notify customer service of issues that need to be sorted out with the system?
Yeah, sure, Larry. Thanks for that, and thanks for taking it from that perspective. So I would suggest that a best practice might be for the inclusion of a piece of braille, perhaps, or some sort of large print number of the bus in a place that is consistent in the system. So you might have the barrier excuse me, between operator and first seat on the left. And you might, by a matter of policy, place a braille strip there that identifies this is bus number so-and-so, so that the riding public who have visual impairments might know that that's where they can go to find out which bus they're riding. So I think that would be considered from our perspective a best practice in that way. What I would suggest to the riding public beyond that is take note also, if you can, of the route you were traveling and when you were traveling, and as much detail as you can about the trip you were taking at that moment, so that when you call customer service or submit the form online or whatever the case is, that they can, to the best of their ability, zero in on which vehicle it was that you were riding in at the time. So hopefully, Larry, that's some helpful thoughts.
Yeah. Is there anything for trains as well? Because in terms of really kind of identifying a certain train that operates on a certain route, because
it's largely the same, actually. Okay. It's you'll find that there's so for those of us with a visual ability, there's often a number that's written onto the front of the coach, the train somewhere, what have you. The same would be happening, would exist hopefully in Braille or in some way that that we can read it identified if we are not able to see it visually. Again, I would speak to the transportation agency and suggest that that be provided if possible for you.
And actually here in Washington, D.C., the rail cars have on the doors, like between cars, right by the door, there's an emergency phone. Right above the emergency phone that says, "This is rail car," with the rail car number. On a sign that's actually fairly large that you can see from other places in the car, but it's a standard location of the rail car information. But I would think, if places would, transit systems would put numbers by the door in some kind of standard location, that would be probably a good place as a good start. So.
Yeah, very good. Let me turn for a moment to our chat box. We have a couple of statements here. We had a question about how to communicate in a nonverbal way the announcements. I hope that the previous answer about the flip cards or something like that would be helpful there. If not, please feel free to communicate with us again. Rebecca has suggested that stop announcements are beneficial not only to those with disabilities or the elderly, but to folks with limited English proficiency. And yes, indeed, as Christian said, the riding public as a whole benefits in myriad ways from knowing where they are and having those stop announcements. And so if you're able to communicate better in spoken word than in reading for whatever reason, that's also beneficial to you. And Tanya asks about the availability of training materials. We will, as I said, provide a document that has a great deal of information about how to design a training setup about stop announcements as well. So great. With that, I think we have another question on the phone. Stephanie, could you patch him through?
Your next question is from Walt in Washington.
Actually, this is Larry Ham. I'm Walt's associate over here at C-Tran in Vancouver, Washington. And anyway, I wanted to first of all say thank you for the webinars, because I enjoy the Easter Seals webinars. They're very informative and love the open discussion here. Let me lay the background work for my question. We have a frequent route, Route 4, which goes through our own downtown Vancouver and then has a stop at a MAX or light rail station in Portland, and it runs every 15 minutes. It veers off of the freeway to make a stop at what's called Jansen Beach and the big shopping center there before continuing on to that light rail station. What we're looking at doing is doing a scheduling that we call a skip stop, where every other bus would pull into Jansen Beach instead of having a 15-minute frequency stop there. So it'd be 30 minutes to the second to the last stop, and then 15 minutes to the very last stop at the light rail station. Right now, we do have automated announcements inside and outside the bus. The outside announcement is tied to the destination, meaning you stop, open up the door, and they'll make an announcement, Route 4 to Delta Park. And what we're concerned about is the passengers, let's say it's a sight impaired passenger mid-route bus stops, and it's actually going to be one of the trips that skips Jansen Beach, but it's always going to say is Route 4 to Delta Park, so they're not going to know that it's skipping Jansen Beach. So if anybody listening has had a problem with this or any suggestions, they could certainly contact us and help us answer it, or yourselves. But the questions are, one, do we have a legal requirement where that outside call-out needs to make that statement that the bus will be skipping Jansen Beach or going directly to Delta Park? Those are the last two stops. Or do we have to find another means of, I know you said cards, we could probably put a card in the window that says, you know, direct to Delta Park or something to that effect, but we'd like to use the automation as much as possible. So before I ramble on too much and get the whole thing confused, I'll let you chime in.
Sure. Now, thanks for all the background. It's helpful in understanding the question and answering the best way that we can. As you were discussing that, I'm thinking to myself of the map that we showed earlier in the presentation of that route in DC that diverges and then reconnects and diverges again, the L route. So I would think about how you look at the route and how you identify, for example, the system. And could you perhaps conceptually split those that go to go the whole path that you described from those that go only to the few and that skip the others, and then perhaps program them in that fashion into your system? That would be, I think, the clearest cut fashion to address that problem. But what you suggested beyond that, in terms of providing additional information about the route, certainly you would want to do that. You'd want to provide some information that says, this is the version of the number 40 bus that goes there, and make sure that that's announced on regular intervals, and especially at those points, as we discussed earlier, where the diversion would occur. So if there's a street at which like you said, the freeway, where one route goes one way, or one version of this route, for example, goes one way and the other another, to make sure that that point is very well covered by announcements and that people are able to make the choice to switch if they are headed in one place, toward one place or the other. So I would encourage you to look at it from that other perspective, but I would again err on the side of providing as much information in as many formats, and you suggested the signage, also a good idea as is possible. But does that help you in some way?
Yeah, it does. You know, it's back to the automation, because both legs of the route are going to end up at the same destination. And talking with our IT folks, they're wrestling with how we're going to do that, you know, with the configuration of the ADL CAD and automated stop announcement. So we're trying to work that out. But now back to the legal part of the question. If the end destination is the same for both legs of the route and providing the higher frequency, then if we don't have it in the automated announcements, and let's say an operator doesn't put the right card up or any card at all, or make any statements that indicate that one stop's going to be skipped on a trip, is there anything that we could get into legally that says you are supposed to make that announcement if you are indeed making an announcement?
I would refer to Christian. Do you want to?
Yeah, just if that, since the legal requirement is to announce stops at major sections, and then say you have a policy to announce scheduled stops, and on that particular route that stop is no longer on the schedule, then technically, if you see what I'm saying there, that technically that it's not a stop announcement that you're not making, or if the I don't remember if you said this at the beginning of the question, but if that route, the one that skips that stop, if that just has a different route number or something like that, then that's an identifier as well, and then you can have some sort of public awareness campaign where you just put up that specific schedule in the different buses and hand it out as pamphlets, and then riders know that stop's getting skipped on that specific bus.
Yes, please.
This is Donna Smith, and I apologize for joining the webinar late. I'm also with Easter Seals Project Action. But the first thing I want to say is that we cannot give you legal advice because we're not attorneys. However, if you do want, if you're concerned about legal counsel, we do recommend that you contact whoever are the attorneys for your agency and get them to review what the ADA says about it and what they would believe would be a legal obligation in that way. However, from a technical assistance aspect of it, what Rick and Christian have been saying make really good sense. And what I would say is that you just want to be sure that everybody has the same information when they get on that bus. So if you have information that's clear on the vehicle, for people who can see or read signs or whatever they need to be doing, who will know that when they get on that bus which one they're taking, which way it's going to diverge, so that they know what their correct endpoint is and where it's going to stop, etc. Then you need to make that same information available in an auditory fashion. And it sounds like from the setup that you have now, with the fact that the identifier just says the endpoint, which is the same for both routes, then what you're going to have to do is insist that your operators provide that additional information. It may be something that they would rather not have to do, but it's certainly within the intent of the ADA that information be made available to everyone. We have here in DC also on one of our Metro Rail routes, they'll go in the same direction, but one goes farther than the other. And even though the sign on the train says what the endpoint is for both routes, the operators still repeatedly say this train stops in Silver Spring and does not go to Glenmont. And they say that over and over so that when you're riding, if you're reading your book or talking to somebody else and not paying attention, that everybody knows that this is the one that stopped short, and you're on the wrong train if you need to go farther. So you may want to consider something like that your operators can just say to anybody stepping on the bus, we do not stop at whatever stop you don't stop at.
Okay, thank you, Donna. That does help out quite a bit, and I heard a lot of what I was looking for, so appreciate all the responses.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you very much for the very good discussion there. We appreciate any opportunity to provide that kind of in-depth information. Let me turn back to this chat box for a moment. And a question from Steve. He asks, have any smartphone apps been developed for bus location or announcement? And I think, Steve, if I'm reading your question correctly, you're referring to something that would be carried by an individual. I'm not personally aware of such a thing, but what I will say is that people can often use a navigation app of any kind that would identify their position as they're traveling. So it's very helpful for someone, for example, who's blind to have that tool at their disposal to kind of be the backup of, where are we now as we're traveling? And someone who travels very frequently might well, by matter of practice, pull that out if, for example, the bus is not providing the announcements in the way that they're used to if the system is not functioning. So from a personal level, that such a thing can exist. Let me look to my colleagues. Anything else?
This is Christian. I only know of one that's meant for identifying where different buses are, that's crowdsourced. It's called Moovit, M-O-O-V-I-T, and I believe it's for iPhone and Android. I'm not sure if it's supported on other phone systems or not. And that's where your phone, presuming it has GPS and you have the app, will ring up your position on a vehicle. And if vice versa, if you're looking for to find out when the next bus is arriving, you can pull up that app and it will activate it for other people who are on that bus already, and it can kind of show you where they are along the route. Also, there's a lot of transit agencies now have GPS on the bus and give their information to NextBus, which is a system that you can usually either pull up over an app, or transit agencies will make it available through their website. And if you have a mobile browser, then you can key in your stop code and find out when the next bus is coming.
Those technologies are obviously extremely helpful. I'll take, well, now it's a good time to have another question from the phone. I know we have a few more in queue. So Stephanie, can we have the next on the phone, please?
Your next question comes from Zeddy.
Hi, this is Zeddy in Charlotte.
Hi, Zeddy.
Hi, our major transfer point is at a transit center in Uptown Charlotte, in the middle of Uptown Charlotte, and we've had complaints about some of our announcements being too long and too many because as bus routes approach the Uptown area, there are major intersections or points along the way where you can transfer to different buses before you get to the transit center. So, for an example, several points along the way it might say something like, now approaching whatever intersection, transfer to, and it would name like 7 express buses and 4 local buses. And it would do this, periodically as you come into Uptown until you get close to the transit center. So we had a lot of complaints about those announcements being too long and too many. So recently we got a group of riders together and decided on those approaches as you got close to Uptown that we would change those announcements to say, now approaching whatever intersection, transfer to local and express buses. And I'm just wondering, is that okay to not actually name each route that you can transfer to? Although as you go to the transfer center, once you get there, you can transfer to any bus.
Right. First of all, let me commend you on involving the public in the way you did in coming up with that approach. I would say that you're not doing a bad job at all in doing it in the way you have. It's of course important to remember that when a route diverges or when there are those points that transfers must be made, having that information is of course beneficial to anybody. Being repetitive about that is not necessary for that kind of orientation, and so I would keep that in mind as well. But I would say, generally speaking, what you've suggested sounds like a good idea, and I'll turn to my colleagues here if anybody has anything they want to add more to that.
Well, yeah, and it's a good point too. If you get too much information on any stop announcement, where there's too much information, where people are getting confused, or they say that it's overwhelming, or it's not comfortable because overloaded, then the value of the stop announcement really isn't there. So I think kind of clarifying and simplifying could be beneficial as long as people understand what you're doing, and that they could get that information in other places when they get off the bus or from the driver, right?
Right, and mostly the purpose for stop announcements is to know that you're where you are. So it's for orientation purposes, and so what the person riding the bus already knows they need to transfer to the 16F bus, and that they make that transfer at Main Street. But what they need to know is when they're at Main Street.
And
yeah, that's the purpose of the announcement. So as long as you're given that level of information, and then if you want to, at the main center, say something like, now we're at the, the transit center where you can relocate to, and give a lot of information there or something, that's fine. But yeah, if you have too much to listen to along the way, you're going to quit listening is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
You quit paying attention to it. So I think that you got really good advice from your riders and have made some good adjustments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Zeddy. Let me turn back to the chat box now for a moment, and I'll first address a question from Pat, who is asking, what can I do about the fact that our external speakers, are regularly damaged by the bus washing system? Yeah. I'd ask you to contact us perhaps on the side with that question. We'll talk with you more about ways in which that might be addressed, and I'd suggest that if anybody out there in transit world on the webinar now might have a suggestion for Pat, please avail yourself of the private chat feature that you can use to communicate as well. But we'll be happy to talk with you. Pat, if you wouldn't mind sending an email perhaps to webinars@easterseals.com, we'll be happy to try to connect you with some further information on that too. To go back to another point that was made a few minutes ago, and forgive me if I've forgotten the name of the person who was asking, but the question was about detours. And and what to do in terms of announcing detours. And again, to go back to what Donna had said and what we said a few times before, the primary consideration is that you maintain orientation and understanding of where you are. So announcing that this bus will detour and announcing the points at which you have gone off of the typical route and are detouring is important to keeping up that requirement that people are able to have enough information to orient themselves. So I would just suggest that, and I'll ask, is there anything else that we'd want to add to the point of detours?
I would just add to it, this is Donna again, I would just add that when detours happen, what I've noticed some drivers doing is they'll actually just kind of stop the bus so they can address everybody and say, we're approaching a detour, we're going to have to leave the route at this point. We'll be rejoining it at, such and so point, and we're going to miss these stops that'll normally we would stop at. And that gives everybody on the bus the right information they need to have. And then it's up to the rider then to do whatever they need to do once the detour is made to get back, to make their own adjustments. So the point of the stop announcements is to give the information about where you are. And then it's up to the rider to have the skill to do what needs to come next.
Great. Thank you, Donna, for that. I know that we have one question remaining in the telephone queue. What I'm going to ask you, Stephanie, please, could you remind everyone how they can ask a question on the phone? And then once we've done that, can we go to the remaining questionnaire in line?
Again, if you would like to ask a question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Your next question comes from the line of Chris.
I wanted to say that this is a very good webinar, and what I think is also important when I'm talking to people who do training, meaning the population participating, is that I think that in my system I can ask for an individual trainer to train me to a route. And several of our agencies have appointed peer route trainers, say, with a similar disability, so that can assist the bus system in learning the stops. And that's really important. But I know that there's been discussion about contacting customer service with problems. And I believe that customers should also contact customer service when they see exemplary performance, because I have had some really excellent drivers who have gone out of their way to either help me cross the street or to be very direct and say, this is not a safe place for me to let you off today because they're doing construction, and I will drop you off here. And I've never been able to drive, so sometimes that information is really helpful, and the driver is, sometimes it's a risk. I mean, if I call up and say, this person left the bus to help me cross the street, I worry they're going to get in trouble. But, those are things that I think are also important, and that it's not just call up and complain. Thank you.
Well, no, thank you, Chris. I want to thank you for a couple of points. One, for the ringing endorsement of the importance of travel training, which I think we would all share in your enthusiasm for in terms of ensuring that folks are able to use the fixed route system to the greatest extent of their abilities. And yes, we always encourage, and like I said before, an environment, an interaction between customer and transit agency that is mutually supportive. So not only, as you said, offering comments when they are negative in nature and something has gone wrongly, but offering those comments that say, this has been done really well, I really appreciate this has worked, I like this driver because he gives this extra bit of information about the route as we're traveling, I like that he signals that we're approaching such and such mall, and providing that kind of positive feedback as well is really helpful to everybody concerned. So thank you for that suggestion too, Chris. I think that we have just a little bit more information coming across the chat box. We have some great conversation about the apps. I like that that's kind of the modern the modern effort here is for there to be an app for everything, and I think we're coming to learn that there's an app that's helpful in navigating the systems we're talking about here too. So thanks everybody for sharing that. Stephanie, can I ask you, is there another person in line on the phone?
There are no additional questions at this time.
Okay, then I'll give just a few seconds. If there's any remaining question that you'd like to ask, please do so by pressing *1 if you'd like to ask it on the phone, or if you want to just go ahead and type a question for us into the chat box, please feel free to do that. We'll give you just a few more seconds in case anybody has any remaining questions. But we've had a good number of questions here. They've been very thoughtful. I thank you all for providing those today and for engaging in the kind of conversation that we had said earlier that we very much wanted to have today. We've been very successful there. So thank you. Given that, let's see. Have we, you know what? I am at this point seeing that people's questions appear to be exhausted. I'm glad to see that. I will say if anybody has any questions remaining or something that comes to mind after we leave today, please feel free to send a question in email. The email address is webinars@easterseals.com, and feel free to let us know your questions that come up after we close, because we know that invariably happens. But with that, we will go ahead and close out today's session. So, Christian, if you don't mind.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thanks everyone for those excellent questions. We really enjoyed answering them. On behalf of Easter Seals Project Action, we'd like to thank everyone who is on this call, as well as our friends at Better World and Blackboard Collaborate. If you're interested in obtaining a text or PDF transcript of the program, then you can go to our website, www.projectaction.org, in about 30 days, and we'll have those posted. And if you'd like the transcript in Braille or audio CD, then you can go ahead and make that request to webinars@easterseals.com. And if you could give us your postal address, then we'll be sure to send those materials. We're also going to have a recording of the webinar made available shortly after the session. So you can contact us again at webinars@easterseals.com for access instructions, and we'll be happy to send those. Thank you again for your participation today. We have a link to the event evaluation that's going to be going out to you via email shortly after the event. So if you could just take a few minutes to fill that out and let us know the effectiveness of the event, whether or not you enjoyed it. Any feedback you give us is very valuable to us as we shape our future sessions. And again, if you could watch our website at projectaction.org and your email for future Easter Seals Project Action events, we'd really appreciate it. We always enjoy your participation. Most importantly, thank you for your commitment to bringing together the disability community and the transportation industry to improve accessible transportation in your community. Have a great day.
Thank you. This concludes today's conference call. You may now disconnect.